Yeah, now we're live. Okay, super. Welcome, Sindhoor. Sindhoor Pangal is with me today for another episode of Just Animals Among Other Animals. And yeah, I'm really excited that we get to speak to you about an update on both your work in particular with Streeties, but the situation for Streeties in India per se, because you will fill in, but if I understand correctly, last August it started with the Supreme Court declaring that all streeties, so free living dogs in New Delhi, needed to be removed, sheltered. But since that is not really feasible, other solutions were quite likely. And this has now been applied to the rest of the country. And so I'd really love for you to tell us a little bit about the legal basics that apply to the street dog populations in India before the Supreme Court started weighing in, how it came about that they enjoyed some protection, and just what the situation is at the moment, please.
Yeah. So, India has had a long history of coexisting with street dogs. In fact, I frequently explain to people that India sort of maintains the legacy of the two species. Dogs and humans co evolved to be with each other, to uh, they really influenced each other, and they have become the species that they are because of each other. And so that close relationship between the two species, specifically not the more modern version that we see of dogs being owned and used in structured ways, but free living dogs sharing space with humans, thriving in the ecological niche that has human beings. Uh, that is what India has had for a very long time, to the point where we see that represented in our mythology and things like that. India is really a very old country. Um, and we've seen a continuity in that kind of a relationship between the two species. But and that was kind of also represented. It did that relationship did um, sort of tense up when during colonization. And so under the British Raj there was a uh, lot of efforts to get rid of the dogs through sustained culling, and that was attempted for almost a century, which did not work. And then post independence, the case was made to several municipalities in the country to say that this is not the way to go, this is not the right thing to do, not just from a cultural perspective and an ethical perspective, but also from a public health perspective. Rabies and dog bites, that removing these dogs through culling was really not the solution. And so for the last 20 years, the norm in India has been, or rather the requirement, the legal requirement has been to engage in what we call CNVR, which is capture, neuter, vaccinate, and release. So the dogs need to be released back to where they belong. And that was the legal requirement. You could not relocate the dogs, and they enjoyed a certain amount of protection also under the law in terms of Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act. And so there was a certain amount of legal protection for them, both in terms of protecting them from cruelty, but also recognizing that they belonged on the streets and that they had to be returned back to the streets after animal birth control procedures and vaccinations. Um, and India being India, of course, while we have some good laws, our implementation of the law is not always very good. It has much to be desired. And so these procedures that are recommended, which for the last 2 decades, this has been the requirement in the country, but that has not been implemented across the country. It has been only well implemented in certain parts of the country. And the parts where it has been implemented really well, we see great results in terms of improvement of public health, rabies down to zero, dog bites are down, so on and so forth. But also many parts of the country, of course, almost all of rural India and many parts of urban India have not had appropriate implementation of adequate implementation of the law. Um, and much of the money allocated for this has really not been used the right way. Corruption has gotten into the way, and so to many this looked like a failure of the the approach itself rather than the implementation.
Mhm.
And then in August of last year, the Supreme Court decided to very suddenly, sort of, it really came out of nowhere for us. Take up a legal action, an order to say that all the dogs in New Delhi have to be removed and put in shelters. And this was based on a suo motu action. A suo motu action means that there was no case that they reacted to. They just decided to take this up based on a false newspaper article that they read. Um, which in itself is legally problematic because a suo motu action cannot be taken if unless there is a vacuum of law. But given that India already has laws around these free living dogs, it does not warrant a suo motu action, but it was done nonetheless. So, which is also kind of indicative of larger problems apart from dogs, right? Which is legal systems collapsing, judicial systems collapsing, constitutional guarantees being thrown aside by people in power, so on and so forth. So it's very problematic on multiple fronts. Uh, uh, but the Supreme Court came in at that time, and then there was some back and forth on it over the next few months. And where it stands as of now is the courts are still deliberating on this. However, they're tending towards wanting to roll this out across the country, which is that they want to put about 10% of the free living dogs of this country into shelters. Now, 10% is still a very large number in India because we have anywhere between 60 to 100 million free living dogs. And so 10% still means many dogs going into shelters. And the irony of this is that the courts, the three judges who have taken this decision, do not want to seem to engage in a conversation about where are the shelters for these dogs. They don't exist. Shelters don't exist. They pose severe risks to public health. They are highly unethical. And this is extreme overreach by the judiciary, where they are bypassing the legal systems of the country. And so these are conversations that they do not want to engage in. They do not want to talk about the science of this. Large organizations like, for instance, Mission Rabies or GARC, Global Alliance for Rabies Control, all of them have their statements which say that this is not the way to go. But these three judges seem to not want to engage in that conversation, which brings up many questions around the health of the democracy itself.
Mhm. That is really very interesting and insightful. Can you explain or can you introduce the different groups and agents a little more who are? So we've got the three judges, and then, pardon me, I imagine there will be also politicians, NGOs. You mentioned a number of institutions. I wonder about certain people trained in animal law specifically. I'm just wondering whether you could um, walk us through the landscape that has formed around that issue. Like, who are the main players, and where do you see? Yeah.
Yeah. So the this whole action seems to have started with three judges in the Supreme Court. Um, Now, if there are politicians involved in this decision that has not been revealed to us, there's no reason to believe there aren't. I mean, this is given the way the world is functioning. A lot of these things could be politically motivated, could be there could be other motivations to commercial, financial. We don't know, but what we know is the three judges. Like that's a fact that we do know. um, Once the hearing started, there were a lot of petitioners that went in to petition against this, and many of the lawyers in the country offered their services pro bono to argue against this move, argue in favor of keeping the dogs and not sheltering them. And it's wonderful for us to see that all almost all the leading senior most lawyers of the country were part of this. So it was really interesting that the judges themselves commented on how there were so many petitioners in the court for this case, uh, far surpassing many cases that have to do with humans. For in fact, that was the observation they made. I don't think this is as much of humans versus dogs, really, which is, I don't think, something they're able to see. It's really, the two issues are not disconnected, which of course they're refusing to see. So there are a whole host of lawyers, and then there are several organizations, and really there are countless number of organizations that have petitioned in court. They are organizations that have been involved on ground with feeding dogs, getting them neutered, since the government has been so dismal in their implementation of CNVR, or ABCARV as we call it, animal birth control and anti-rabies vaccine, ABCARV. Those are my dogs outside. um, since they've been so dismal in it, we have been, as citizens, really contributing towards this. So there are organizations, big and small, across the length and breadth of the country, and individuals across the length and breadth of the country who put their own money and effort into feeding the dogs and making sure that they're vaccinated and sterilized. So many of them also were petitioners in the court. And now I must point out that the court was so biased in this case that they decided to levy a fee, insist on on a fee that petitioners who were arguing in favor of the dogs had to pay in order to become petitioners. However, the ones who were arguing against the dogs were not asked to pay anything. So
Oh,
they
so do you?
made it. That's the thing, none of this is legal, so that is the problem here, right? And it's they've not made a secret of it that we are going to make it hard for you to argue, and we could not care less what argument you make. We will still steamroll over this. There have been protests happening right across the country, and so there have been several citizen groups that have cropped up. I won't even call them organizations, because they're just citizens that are self-organized with, platforms like WhatsApp. Um, they are organized, as they call themselves, squads and groups, and there are many different names, rapid response teams, and so on and so forth, and taken up many parts of this problem. Everything from not just education and not just informing and supporting the lawyers, but also um, on ground work. So as a kind of a fallout of the Supreme Court conversation, despite the fact that there isn't still a ruling on it, many municipalities have decided to take this matter into their own hands and start acting proactively and start removing the dogs. And so these activists, these people have been very involved with uh, tracking these dogs, following the vehicles, informing them that there is no law yet. And so their action is now illegal, and therefore returning the dogs back and bringing them back to where they belong. And then there are international players, like, for instance, Mission Rabies or Global Alliance for Rabies Control, who have been involved with um, vaccinating dogs and following through on scientific procedures and processes for rabies eradication to align with the WHO 0 by 30 goal, which is they want zero rabies by 2030. And to get to that goal, they have been pushing forward models that have had success in certain parts, shown to have success, and trying to push that with different governments in. And so they too have presence in India. And their role continues to be more of on ground work and continuing to put their head down and just do what they need to do. So it's not as much activism. So that's kind of the landscape that you have.
Thank you. That was really very helpful. So I imagine some of the listeners will wonder why. I mean, I suppose you could argue that people are just very supportive and caring towards these street dogs, and perhaps it's just a case of animal lovers, so to speak. And but there's an important ecosystem role that these dogs fulfill, and that is related, if I understand correctly, to why the previous culling did not work. You mentioned it earlier. You said when they did try to cull, the rabies and the dog bite rates did not go down. So why then is it inefficient, and what is the role that these dogs fulfill in this urban ecosystem?
Yeah. So there really are two aspects to this. One is the public health aspect. Uh, I suppose three aspects to it. There's public health, there is ecosystem and ecosystem balance, and then there is a bit more of a, I don't want to say cultural aspect, but I think an anthrozoological lens to look at it, maybe even sort of political. So we'll get to that. Now, if you look at the ecosystem, is perhaps the right place to start. Like I said, dogs are not a product of active domestication. The domestication of dogs predates the human era of domestication. So it happened. Dogs entered our lives much, much, much earlier, and now the growing consensus is that they were not a product of active human action to domesticate them, but rather they co-evolved with human beings. So it was sort of a voluntary involvement with us. And so these are animals that actually evolved to thrive in a specific ecological niche, and that specific ecological niche is human existence. So human settlements is really where they thrive. And so the role that they play in human settlements is that of scavenging. That is really their role, clearing garbage, and creating competition for other urban scavengers. And all ecosystems have an ability to support a certain amount of life based on the availability of food that we create. And India, again, has a severe problem with garbage clearance. We haven't figured it out. And so we're struggling with it. And so it is not a surprise that we have a lot of urban scavengers, and the dogs being a big part of this. Now, the dogs, however, are an interesting species, unlike other scavengers. The other scavengers could be rats, mongooses, squirrels, so on and so forth. Dogs are highly, highly approachable. They approach human beings very easily. They allow us to approach them. It just takes a little bit of an eye contact, and they're happy to come running to us. And so it's possible to catch them, neuter them, stabilize their population, and vaccinate them. So keep them healthy and keep them around. And they pose uh, they provide the competition for other scavengers. And so as long as a healthy dog population exists around us, we don't have, for instance, an explosion of rats. Now, when you
Which
start
would
removing, sorry?
And I imagine people would have a much harder time capturing and vaccinating and re-releasing rats, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, obviously. You can't exactly look at a rat and smile and the rat's not going to come up and jump into your arms. And if that happens, that would be scary. Um, Now, when you start removing dogs, especially in large numbers like this, two things happen. Immediate result of this, which you can sort of start to anticipate already, is that rat populations go up. They bring along with them diseases, including rabies, but also leptospirosis and plague and things like that, and maybe even novel diseases. Novel diseases are really scary because we don't have time we encountered a novel disease from a rodent was COVID, right? COVID was from bats. And so encountering novel zoonotic diseases is one of the worst things that we can do. And given the kind of climate change and the issues that the global south sees, we repeatedly have floods and extreme temperatures coming back to back for us, which provide the environment for incubating a lot of these novel diseases and spreading them rapidly. And then on top of it, India is an antibiotic resistant country. The people here have a high level of antibiotic resistance, which means that we incubate superbugs. And so this is just extremely dangerous to disrupt an ecosystem like this without understanding what's going to happen as a result of that. So if you start seeing news reports of new diseases in India, spread of new diseases in India, frequently we can trace it back to mass culls of dogs. That we've seen this in the past. It has happened in the past. We've had plague breakouts in the past because of mass culls of dogs. Immediately followed by, for instance, let's say if there's a flooding that follows right after, then that's a recipe for disaster in a country like India. And so doing this nationwide in a time like this is really um, begs the question of why domain experts are not being called in. Why isn't there a single public health expert who's part of this decision making? Why is it three people who only have an understanding of the law and don't seem to be respecting that either, involved in a decision of this magnitude for a country of this size and potentially creating a pandemic risk for the rest of the world? Why are three people uh, going to be allowed to do this? The other aspect of this is dog populations. They're not going to be able to take away 60 million dogs overnight. They're even with their targets, it's 10% of the dogs. So the remaining 90% of the dogs, when you put a population under pressure, they start reproducing faster and in larger numbers, which means that within no time the dogs are going to be back. And our experience and data shows us repeatedly that when you remove an existing stable population, the population that comes back is usually twice the number. And when they come back in twice the number, two issues. One, of course, their numbers are larger, but that apart, they're not vaccinated dogs. So they potentially bring back rabies into what was earlier a rabies free area. But two, also they are now new dogs with more competition. They're not socialized, they're not well established in this area. So there's higher confusion amongst the population, higher degree of conflict amongst the dogs, which can spill over to human beings, and thus bites can also increase. And so when you keep removing dogs, we see that the data shows that rabies numbers don't go down. Um, sorry, numbers don't go down. Bite numbers is also don't go down. Both those numbers go down only when we have a sustained ABC ARV program. And then, of course, the third aspect of it, which is a lot of the care and the nurture that, I mean, there are dog lovers, a lot of, but dog lovers is not really the right part, a right kind of expression, because a lot of people are simply tolerant of animals. That is part of the DNA of this country, which is that we don't panic around animals. I live in a rural part of India. There are snakes and peacocks and hares, and not panicking around these animals and just accepting them. It's a extremely biodiverse country. So accepting them as part of our existence has been our history. But I think over the last few decades, or maybe a decade, it's there has been a concerted effort to make us more intolerant, but also there has been a concerted effort to look down upon tolerance as uh, irrational, feminine, sentimental. And so you'll also see that much of this kind of the tensions that exist right now. If you look at the people who want to get rid of the dogs, there's a huge male representation there. And if you look at the people who are trying to protect the dogs, there's a huge female representation there. And so we're often told, and I talk about this, right? We're often told, oh, if you love the dogs so much, why don't you take them to your houses and take them to your homes? And I would argue, why is it that our acts of nurture and care have to be taken away and hidden shamefully inside our houses, while your actions of violence, extraction, and exploitation are done proudly out on the streets? And so there is this kind of dismissal of nurture and care, um, and dismissal of the people fighting it as saying that, oh, these are just women who don't know what they're talking about. They don't know the science of it, despite the fact that many of us are scientists, many of us are researchers, and many of us are providing scientific information. There's just a dismissal of it simply because we're female. And it's also resulting in a lot of violence against women. It seems that the Supreme Court um, deliberations has given license to a lot of people to mete out violence to women. So it's most times, towards women, because women are the nurturers here, is to get out, and it's okay for them to take sticks and beat them up. And it seems like um,
But for
we are seeing it as completely acceptable.
Oh wow, that's horrific. So while they are caring and nurturing the dogs, they are then assaulted by people who take side with the Supreme Court view. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Wow. That's really heavy. As for dog bites, I also wanted to better understand where the statistics come from or how the statistics form. So I understand in India you do have the street dog population, but you also have um, uh, pet dogs, so dogs who are private property of people who are kept inside. And from what I've learned about Streeties is that most of the time and that's what you also in the interview we did earlier last year, you gave us a very good understanding of how they know how to read humans and how to avoid conflict with them. And that oftentimes when dog bites occur, that's with dogs who cannot escape because perhaps they are kept as pets. So just to get a better understanding of the dog bite issue underlying that so how many streeties are responsible for the dog bite problem, and how often are pet dogs confounded in the politics around the matter?
Yeah. So that this is the other tragedy of it all, is that the data gathering on this is very poor. There was a study, 2024 study, that was done with a lot more precision, but it was in a really small part of the country, and it was a study that was done. It isn't like ongoing data gathering, and the study showed that bulk of the dog bites come from pet dogs, not from street dogs, and that makes a lot of sense. The most severe of the bites and the most number of bites come from pet dogs because they don't have agency. But so many of the numbers that are being reported in the media, and it's such a sad commentary on what the world is coming down to, that the courts rely more on media reports rather than actual data that we provide, their own governmental data that they looking at it, and what the scientists are providing. They seem to have no interest in looking at that. They look at just newspaper articles, and so much of that is misrepresentation. Not only are the numbers just arbitrarily inflated, but also they're based on calculation of rabies vaccines. Now, we can't forget that uh, 3 to 5 doses of vaccines are given per bite. So the numbers that are reported are 3 to 5 times the actual number of bites that we see. On top of it, bulk of those numbers, bulk of those vaccines are often taken by people who are working with dogs. So it's not exactly like you're out on the streets and you've gotten bitten. That's really not what's happening. Many of the vaccines are taken by people like me who are actually, hands-on working with them, and as a result of that are getting bitten for various reasons, and not even necessarily getting bitten. Sometimes it's just a scratch, and the doctors insist that we take the vaccines. And so those numbers are misrepresented from that aspect as well. And none of that data separates out street dogs versus pet dogs versus, you know, or for that matter, bites versus vaccines and the profession of the people involved. So all of that is just conflated together, and a number is presented, which then a newspaper article um, without hesitation will happily just double it and present it in the paper, because there's absolutely no one to question this.
Okay. Thank you. So I find everything that you say very convincing, and it just seems completely ludicrous what they are proposing and what they're after. And yet, if you look around a little, you also find people who argue that the outrage about the Supreme Court action amounts to hypocrisy, because if and I'm playing the devil's advocate here, or I'm reporting from what I've also read, is that they say if people care so much about Streeties, they should have a better understanding of what their lives really are like, because there's a very high puppy mortality. Life expectancy is usually between 3 to 4 years. And by the way, while there are a fair number of people who are tolerant of Streeties, or even actively caring for them, streeties are also often the victims of pretty severe human hostility. So they say then that this should be welcomed as an improvement to the living conditions. And yeah, so I'm just wondering how you have a conversation with people who argue that case, that takes into account the um, bad or less than optimal welfare, at least as relates to life expectancy and being recipients of human hostility.
Yeah. So this argument completely lacks in practicality, right? Because when you talk about welcome this as an improvement to lifestyle, let's for a minute assume that it is in fact potentially an improvement to lifestyle. So then the question that comes to mind is, when we talk about removing 10% of 60 million dogs, 6 million dogs, where are they going to be put? This improved lifestyle, where does it exist other than in their minds? Does it actually exist anywhere that we can give them access to that improved lifestyle? It doesn't.
Yeah.
It simply doesn't. So, what is the ground reality then? The ground reality is one of a few things. One, the dogs are being removed and relocated. And where are they being relocated to? Because there are no shelters to put them in. So, let's just accept that. That is something that seems to be missing in the conversation, which is that these shelters that we talk about are mythical shelters. It's like Shangri-La, it doesn't exist. So where are they being relocated to? One is they're being relocated from urban areas into rural areas where there are no healthcare centers for animals, there are no ABC centers. And so we are not able to do vaccinations, and their quality of life reduces. Second, they're being relocated to the borders of the forested areas. And so they can start spreading zoonotic diseases to animals and vice versa. They can get zoonotic diseases and getting eaten by animals. Again, I don't see that as an improvement in lifestyle. And the third, the Animal Welfare Board of India came up with, again, a very ludicrous plan of shelters where they wanted shelters with less than 20 square feet per dog. They want to overcrowd these shelters and pack them in. And what we have seen is some of the shelters where they have started putting the dogs in, they're dogs with illnesses, dogs with extremely aggressive diseases like canine distemper. All of them are being put in the same place. They're spreading diseases to each other. They're biting each other. They're fighting with each other, and they're dying without adequate food. Again, I don't see that. I don't see anybody seeing that as an improved lifestyle. You have to look at the ground reality. And last but not the least, for instance, Telangana state in South India, which is the neighboring state, has killed more than 1,500 dogs in a span of a week and killed them through the most barbaric means possible, burning them alive, burying them alive, so on and so forth. So I don't see how any of this is an improvement to lifestyle. Of course, we don't want them to be subject to the elements of nature, but or for that matter human violence. We don't want them to have that. We want to protect them from it. But the truth is every other reality is harsher. This ideal world where we can remove them and put them in rainbows and spray them with glitter doesn't really exist. There's another aspect to it which is to consider, which is, and this is true of not just dogs but any animal, or for that matter human beings, not everybody's life looks perfect to all of us. There are those who are less fortunate amongst humans, amongst animals, um, but that is not the only aspect of their life. If you look at several of the treaties here, yes, they have to brave the elements, they have to brave the traffic, they are under severe risk, but also they have friends, they play, they maintain social structures. There are so many more aspects to their life apart from just the suffering. Focusing on just the suffering is a very privileged way of looking at the world. In a country like India, if you spend enough time, you will see that there is no dearth of suffering. There is a lot of suffering, but that doesn't define us. In fact, despite me living a privileged life, it's still a hard life in India. The weather is harsh, the air quality is very poor. Our water is not clean. It's a harsh life. Most people outside India would not come and want to live here. But that is not the only aspect of our lives. We are also capable of other things. You can look at the hard parts of our life, fixate on that, and say, well, that's harsh, something needs to be done, and therefore get rid of the people who are experiencing the harshness. That's one way to look at it, which we have been subject to in the past and continue to be subject to. Another way to look at it is to say, yes, that's harsh, but look at the amount of joy that they're experiencing despite of that. Look at all the other dimensions that they experience despite of that. Look at what they're able to contribute to the world, to those around them. The amount of love that these dogs are able to give to their caregivers. Many of the caregivers and feeders will tell you, many of who are women, it's not very safe country for women, but many of them say that they have the courage to go out on the streets because of these dogs. So the fact that a dog who has nothing, no agency, nothing, absolutely nothing going for them, are still able to make another human being feel safe, that's an extraordinary contribution that they're giving. The fact that they contribute that to the world, the fact that they've managed to get so many people in this country to come together and fight against this, the fact that they've made us find our spine and actually stand up to a system that is so oppressive, I think these are remarkable things that they're achieving. And it would be a pity not to see those aspects of their life and just fixate on the fact that they don't have material comfort and the kind of safety that somebody is used to seeing. That's in your part of the world.
Yeah. No, 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 I agree. And or perhaps also that's perhaps also the lens of people who in India prefer to have pet dogs and to, shower them with all the material goods and yet lock them away the whole day while they're out at work. And I mean, one of the reasons why we wanted to collaborate with you for the Philosophy in the Wild project and to learn how to live in mixed communities with Streeties is because I do believe that this richer, socially rich life is something that many of our pet dogs in the world are lacking, and that really is a tragedy because. And there's also been a good paper on it from a welfare perspective. I think it's called uh, Poor Bastards or Pampered Pooches, where they try to compare welfare going beyond just veterinary care and food safety and account for all the dimensions that go into well-being or a life well worth living from a dog's perspective, and also from a dog's perspective, or different dogs will have different perspectives on what is a good life for them, right? So I think that's
Yeah,
another very important thing we
yeah.
need to.
That's as a professional, I mean, much of my work has to do with pet dogs, really, who I call captive dogs. It's like all a matter of perspective, right, at the end of the day. So to me, pet dogs are really captive animals, and so much of my work has to do with trying to do conflict resolution between humans and captive dogs. And every once in a while, I have people coming in wanting to either turn a street dog into a captive dog, or some kind of a transition of that kind, or even for that matter, keep them captive inside a house for a few days because they're trying to convalesce from a surgery or something like that. And they will frequently tell me that these dogs try their best to escape. They really don't want to be indoors. They do not want, even the dogs here on my property. They were here before I came here, so I never call them my dogs. They're not. I don't own them. But I've tried multiple times to see if I can kind of move them indoors and shift them indoors. And quite honestly, I'm doing that for my comfort, because if I can shift them indoors, I feel um more comfortable, that they're safer. This is like having teenage children, right? You want to keep them inside, you want to keep them protected, because you don't want to deal with the heartache of them having to go out and deal with the world, which is a harsh, difficult world. That's the truth of the matter. And so I know that there's a harsh, difficult world out there. Here we don't have as much traffic and things like that, but there are snakes and boars and other kinds of things. And so I want to see if I can move them inside, but they just don't want it. They've torn apart parts of my wall. They've tried to dig a hole from under the door and try to run out and all kinds of things. They do not want this. They do not like this. They make it very, very clear. And so when we talk about animal agency and respecting their wishes, they're very clear. Whatever it is that you think you're giving us by locking us inside these doors, we don't want them. Thank you very much. So the two times I think I tried to lock them in, it took them 2 weeks after that to even come back and visit me. They were like, "You, we know what you've been up to. We know what you." Like, they really didn't want to come back and visit me. That's how much they hate the idea of being kind of locked indoors. Um, and so I think that's important to consider. And yes, when they go out, in the city, when they go out, they risk running into traffic. They risk being subject to human violence. Out here, they risk being bitten by snakes. They risk being attacked by other animals. Would you have a similar? When I say you, I don't mean you, but would people have a similar thing to, for instance, if you went into the jungle, you went into the forests of India, would you say, oh, this animal can get attacked by another animal, so let's take them all in and put them in zoos so that they don't get attacked by each other? Let's create this Barbie kind of a world where, nobody attacks nobody and everybody is friends with everybody. Again, I don't think you're looking at the reality of things. I think if there was a way to ask these animals, would you take the risk versus keep your agency? What they've demonstrated to me repeatedly is, we'll take the risk. That's okay, but we want our agency. We do not want to be, your property.
Mhm. And that relates to an expression you've used a few times, or I've heard you use a few times in the past, as dogs as independent thinkers, which I really like, also from a philosophical perspective, because I think in the dog world there's, or I mean, perhaps things are shifting a little bit, but by and large, it was always about obedience, mind control, full body control, behaviorism. I mean, a lot of the dog training that we're doing runs on the idea of behaviorism, which per se, if you go back to the philosophical roots of behaviorism, does away with the idea of free will in the first place, right? So yeah, and I'm just wondering whether A, you could talk a little bit more about your understanding as dogs as independent thinkers, and B, what if things go pear-shaped with Streeties is happening on the ground then? Are they are these accidents, or are the dogs having, bad ideas? Or I mean, what perhaps if you could cover these two points, yeah, that would be great.
Sorry, what was the second question? Why is it
The
things go bad with them?
Yeah, if there are accidents with them, not if they took a risk and something happens to them, that's understood. But more like if there is, deliberately trying to avoid the term conflict, but perhaps I should just use it here after all. But conflict always frames the problems then already in such an antagonistic fashion. But if there is an incident that involves streeties and humans, and was it then most of the time that the humans did something that surprised the dog and then they bit, or is it something? Because I think I somewhere also read that there was the idea of opening up designated feeding stations for the street dogs, so that there are certain places where they come to expect food available, and so that they're less hungry and perhaps also pestering people outside of these places, so that they're yeah. So
Yeah.
so my yeah. Sorry, that was.
Um, yeah. So, I mean, there are many topics that you've touched upon here, but one of the things that I do find very important to talk about is when dogs bite, what causes it, right? And I don't mince words here because those are the words that people use, and they're terrified of bites, and rightly so. I understand. And when we advocate for dogs, and when we advocate for coexistence, I think we should not shy away from this conversation, because usually the people who get bitten are the most vulnerable of human beings, typically the elderly and children of low income groups, and it's really not their fault. But it's not the fault of the dog either. I think we have come to view the world so much in binaries that we need to find fault and put blame, and typically the ones who are putting blame are the ones in positions of power, the ones with privilege, and so they always try to find somebody else to put blame on, and it's always the um, um, convenient one to blame, right? And so the dogs always, most of the times, fall in that category. And with some activists choosing to put blame on the humans, but I don't think it's as simple as that. When dogs do end up biting, it's usually for a rather limited set of reasons. It's not that they have sort of malicious intent, and they're thinking, oh, I want to do this to the human beings. It's not really how it is. We're attributing way too much of a kind of human tendencies to animals there, because I think we like that kind of a villain based narrative. Um, and it I think it makes us feel a little bit more in control. I don't know. But when they do bite, it's either because they are highly dysregulated, and the dysregulation could come from severe lack of resources. They're not fed well enough. They're hungry. So they're restless all the time, and they're feeling a sense of competition around food. Um, uh, or they're highly dysregulated because they're being harassed. Um, you don't get the full picture. We have seen this, in fact, on CCTV cameras when there's a bite and we go back and track it. So for instance, when if somebody harasses a dog and the dog may not react then and there, but 15 minutes later, uh, s- a vehicle zips past them and they just snap. um, and that's how dysregulation works. We've seen this with other animals too. We have seen it with captive and pet dogs too. There is a bit of a graph there on how that works. And so they're highly dysregulated because of that, or attempts at trying to catch them. So they're disrupting them all over the place. They're completely sort of messed up, and the right word is really dysregulated. And so that results in bites. So that's a set of things that can dysregulate them. And the other thing is also mating season. So that's also why we recommend neutering, because if it's mating season, that really dysregulates a lot of the dogs. They're chasing each other, they're wearing each other down, they're competing with each other, and there's a perceived sense of competition. And then the other thing that dysregulates them is lack of sleep. So they don't have a place to sleep. They're in very, very busy neighborhoods. They're not getting adequate sleep. As we many of us know by now, dogs need 12 to 14 hours of sleep a day. So they're not really getting that sleep. And so they're dysregulated. The other is a startle response. It's really as simple as that. So I keep telling people this basics. This was what my grandparents taught me. When there are animals around, it doesn't matter, dog, cat, rat, snake, whatever. Don't go near an eating animal, a sleeping animal, an injured animal, and an animal with babies. This is basics. So, not respecting that and having walked too close to a sleeping dog or an eating dog, and there's a startle response, and then they just turn around and bite, and combine the dysregulation with the startle response. It's a recipe for disaster. Um, the third is, of course, a history of trauma. So they've been traumatized in the past. So they're extremely wary of human beings, and then anything can trigger them. We don't know what those triggers are, and that can result in bites. And the fourth big one that falls in this category is health issues, undiagnosed health issues. So it could be communicable diseases like rabies or the onset of distemper, or it could be injuries. And injuries can, for instance, really act up in winter. It can get very painful in winter, or an old injury could have gotten activated again, and so they're suddenly in a lot of pain, or they have a digestive issue, or they have a migraine kind of a thing, and so they're easy to sort of uh, overreact. So these are typically the reasons why we see bites happening. And so when you look at it that way and you understand it, it's so important to have this conversation. Then solutions start getting clearer on what we need to do. We can get rid of 90%, 95% of the bites by resolving a lot of these issues. Um, uh, the idea of having feeding spots is an interesting one. It's, I think, can backfire very badly, but a useful direction to start exploring, because the idea of having feeding spots suggests be more mindful of where you feed them. And that's a good way to think, which is we don't want the startle response. We don't want them to be fed close to, say, where there are a lot of people walking by or there's a lot of traffic. And so find the right place to feed them, move them away from busy areas, move them away from narrow areas, narrow hallways and pathways, and don't feed them near the door. These kind of things are good things to think about. But what's happening, the way it is being done, is they're picking very few feeding spots. It's not enough, and overcrowding dogs. And that's a very bad idea, because not only are they creating like a false sense of competition amongst the dogs, um, they're also creating large packs by combining many dogs and feeding them together. Large pack dynamic is not a great dynamic. It can result in, like, for instance, mob action, right? So it can result in action like that. And so what we really need is many, many, many feeding areas that are mindfully thought out, with, breaking the groups up. And so again, while I think that some amount of the thinking is the right way to go. I think without thinking it through properly, just knee jerk reactions with these things and not engaging in people who understand the ecology of dogs, ethology of dogs, natural history of dogs, behavior of dogs, I think can be very, very problematic.
I'm curious, with such ideas as to establishing feeding stations, are these coming from municipalities, administration, and do they then are they imposed onto what the people who are feeding the dogs anyway already are doing, or are the people who care for dogs in specific streets or neighborhoods involved in the process of thinking about how to feed them better?
I think it's a little bit of both. The municipal bodies, government bodies, I think, are attempting to find solutions, while institutions are trying to do away with the problem by trying to install feeding spots. Um, and sometimes it's also feeders and caregivers who are coming up with this more as a way of finding a buy-in for the feeding rather than as a solution. But it's really more institutional push. And I think again, it comes from a very problematic way of thinking where you feel like, oh, there is a problem we don't know how to solve. Just um, try to narrow the space it is in, like put them all in one place, move them all to one place, and somehow this problem goes away without actually applying thought or engaging with people who understand the topic enough to see long term consequences.
Okay. So before we close, I think I've got at least two more questions, and I'm waiting whether some of the viewers will also put some questions into the chat. But my first question of the two last questions is, what are the next steps as far as the legal case is concerned? So, what is the? I recall there was a hearing not too long ago, and so what is going on legally speaking at this point in time? And yeah, what are you hoping for there?
The legal system in India is as defunct as it gets. It was defunct to start with, and it's just getting worse. So, the legal system in India has always been painstakingly slow. There have been very straightforward cases that have taken decades to resolve. So, we really don't know if this is going to get resolved in a rapid way or they're going to drag their feet for decades. We have no idea. And then on top of it, the additional issue that has come up is that none of the legal processes that have been followed in the past are being followed now. So there's no respect for the constitution. There's no respect for legality. So that's kind of what has really surprised us and taken us off guard. So there's no way for us to predict where this is going to go. They have completed hearings. So they've heard all the petitioners from both sides. They've heard all the states. They seem to be quite miffed with the states in that the states have not presented their numbers properly. They haven't, they're very clear in that they haven't implemented ABC ARV properly. So they seem to be annoyed with that. But at the same time, looking at how they have reacted to the rest of the petitioners, they seem to be extremely biased already. So there isn't an unbiased hearing that's happening. So we really don't know where this is going to go. Our hope is that they're going to take time to deliberate, to say that they need to bring in domain experts. That is the best thing that we can hope for at this point. But quite honestly, I really don't know where it's going to go.
Okay. Um, and then I don't see any questions in the chat. On to my very final question for you, um, which is, if there were two main lessons that you think the rest of the world could learn from what's going on for Streeties in India at the moment, what would these be?
I think I can talk about the main lesson that I learned, which was I think we live in a world which is dramatically changing in terms of power structures. Things that we've taken for granted in the past have not really worked. And so we've had to sort of sit back and think about um, how did this come to be? Because as much as we can talk about the three judges who've decided to take this upon themselves. This is really a reflection of society itself, right? Where it has come to be. And so I think the question I've been asking myself is how did we come to be here socially? And a big part of that was we took the law for granted and refused to engage with community. And I think that is a significant learning for the rest of the world. And it has nothing to do with dogs here, right? Whatever, so many parts of the world are fighting different fights and different social causes. And I think repeatedly the theme that comes up is fighting a social cause now as an activist and just shouting slogans out is all fine, but we arrived here because we failed to do a task that had to be done the last decade or the previous decade, which is engaging with the community to bridge gaps. Where we saw this rift happening, we saw the rifts happening between people of different kinds, people of different countries, races, species. We saw the rift happening and we did not engage with the community and instead relied on what we thought were laws that would protect us and keep our privilege going, and continue to give us a rosy picture of the world. The way we see history is not linear. It's not always going to go in one direction. And, what we think is the better direction, it's going to go back and forth. And so I think the important part here for us to remember is that where community engagement is needed, where we need to engage with our fellow human beings to bridge gaps, there is no shortcut to it. It needs to be done, as painful as it is. And we're beginning to become more and more of individualistic societies where if we find that we don't agree with our neighbors, we simply don't want to have anything to do with them. We don't want to talk to them. We're all we all seem to be taking pride in saying, I'm done with human beings. I go and I do not talk to anybody. I don't meet anybody. But that is that is a privilege that we're exploiting. And when we choose to say that and walk away, we are failing to engage in something that is our responsibility, which is that when we disagree, bridging that gap is our job. It is our job to figure out how to engage with people and educate people and get them to where we think they need to be, or we need to get to where they have to be. That's how we protect those we love, the ideas that we love, the values that we love. If we want to protect them, if we feel strongly about them, we cannot do it without our neighbors. As unsavory as it feels, we cannot do it without them. We cannot rely on the old world order. It doesn't exist. I think it's collapsing. So to me, that is, I think, one of the most important things. And the other is the value of community and in struggles like this, because I don't feel much hope with where this is going. And then I look at all the battles around the world. I don't feel much hope with all of that, and it can feel very draining. And these fights are all coming to our homes, right? Eventually, they'll catch up with all of us. And the way to continue to keep moving forward with all of this is to remind ourselves that our true asset, our true value is those around us, is the love that we share with them and the love that they give to us. So I have managed to survive these last several months and keep my sanity only because I'm reaching out to people constantly. They are reaching out to me, and the dogs, the love that they give me. I focus on that every time it gets overwhelming. I focus on love. We have been taught to disregard that. We have been taught to dismiss that off as irrelevant. But the battles that are coming our way, the only way to fight that is to not lose sight of the fact that love makes a huge difference. So, to me, that has really been the big lesson here.
Thank you, Sindhoor. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for sharing this as a human being with me as a human being, and we both care for the other animals. So it's been a very lovely and rich and inspiring conversation. And yeah, I'll share it obviously on the Substack. And
Yeah.
thanks again for your time. And I keep my fingers crossed, even though the situation looks dire. But I think that you're really a perfect role model for how to engage in these. Yeah, animal politics. And thank you very much indeed for everything.
Thank you. I also want to take a minute to talk about anybody who's listening and wants to participate and help us in any way. I'd like to call out a few things that may be useful. And as you may have inferred by now, the situation is rapidly changing constantly. So, what we need of people, especially people outside India, what we need of you can change based on the developments within the country itself. And so one thing that I would request is please continue to follow us on the different media that we are on. I write blogs. We're on YouTube. We're on Instagram, Facebook, X. So any platform that you're on, just follow the content and read the blogs, read the articles. Like don't just skim over it. The more you understand it, the more you will know where your value is, where you can contribute. So that attention to detail, the even listening to a podcast like this, right, like a long format content where you're getting into the nuances, you're getting into the details, asking the difficult questions, seeking the answers for it, that attention that you give to the matter is of huge importance and value to us. So I would really request that. And then the second thing is, many of you are in different parts of the world where your voice influences how our governments react. And so, if you can write to organizations, animal welfare organizations, animal protection agencies within your countries to issue public statements condemning what's happening in the country right now, that will be very helpful. You can tag us so that we can amplify your voice. You can ask them to tag us, or they can tag the Supreme Court of India, or the Animal Welfare Board of India, whatever it is, to escalate this. That would be really useful. And the third is, if there are Indian government bodies within your country, like the High Commission or any other Indian government bodies within your country, escalating it to those places to say, hey, you need to take cognizance of what's happening here. We are concerned. I think that can also be extremely useful. So, any of that can be useful as of now. Tomorrow, we might need something else from you. I don't know what that is yet, but we do frequently post about this on our social media to say this is what we need from you today. And so, yeah, please don't take your eyes off us. Um, Continue to watch the developments, and that makes a huge difference to us.
Super, thank you. I'll link to your profiles and blogs on in the show notes.
Yes.
Good.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Have a lovely rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you
Bye.
so much for your attention and listening to something that is very hard to listen to. It's not easy. This, I mean, living in India, I feel like checking out of this. I don't want to talk about this, so I can imagine it's not at all easy. So your attention and your interest in all of this matters a lot. I'm hugely grateful to this. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing. Bye. Ciao.
Bye.